Good morning and welcome to the fifth meeting of 2026 of the Economy and Fair Work Committee. First of all, I'd just like to inform committee members that we have apologies from the Deputy Convener, Michelle Thompson, who is unable to make this morning's meeting. First of all, I would just like to ask members if they are agreed to take agenda items 4 and 5 in private. Moving on to agenda item 2, we are considering subordinate legislation this morning and we are going to be taking evidence and considering the Public Procurement India Trade Agreement Miscellaneous Amendment Scotland Regulations 2026 draft. And I'm glad I managed to say that without pausing or hesitating. And with that, I would like to welcome Ivan McKee, Minister for Public Finance, who is joined by Emma Lipinska, Procurement Policy Manager for the Scottish Government. And I'd invite the Minister to make a short opening statement. Ivan McKee.
Thank you. Good morning. As committee members know, the UK Government signed a free trade agreement with India on 24th July 2025, and this agreement, as is often the case, included a procurement chapter which provides for reciprocal access to public procurement. Scottish procurement regulations set out that bidders from countries with which a relevant trade agreement applies are entitled to equal treatment when bidding for contracts in Scotland. To implement this particular agreement, the instrument being considered by the committee today will, if agreed by Parliament, update the list of relevant agreements by inserting a reference to the new agreement between the UK and India into those Scottish procurement regulations. The effect of this will be to ensure that suppliers from India will be entitled to the same treatment as Scottish or other suppliers when bidding for contracts which are covered by this agreement. And importantly, under the terms of the agreement, Scottish bidders will of course be entitled to equal treatment when bidding for contracts in India too.
Thank you very much, Minister. And I have indications from 3 members that would like to ask questions. First of all, Gordon MacDonald.
Thanks very much, Convener, and good morning, Minister. I've got a question about is there safeguards for Scottish industry. Since 2008, we saw many financial services jobs being offshored to India, and there is a large textile industry in India, and Scotland has its own textile and apparel industry. Is there a danger that when it comes to public contracts that they could be exposed and we could lose market share, and that would have the impact on Scottish businesses?
Well, you need to look at this as any trade deal in the round, and the data shows that Scotland exports more to India than we import, and the analysis shows that the potential for increasing those exports is significant as a consequence of removing trade barriers, which of course apply in both directions. So in terms of the textile sector specifically, there's been some analysis done on that by UK Government that shows about 0.7% impact on the sector in terms of GVA, which is of course an impact, but it's not a significant impact in that sense. So I think, as I say, you need to look at that in the round and consider the fact that we already export more to India and there's significant potential to increase that further.
Thank you.
Very much. I'd like to invite Lorna Slater to ask questions.
Thank you, Convener. I had said I had 2, actually I have 3. The first question, just based on your opening remarks, Minister, about suppliers in India would now have equal access to the Scottish market. When we've just been discussing our community wealth building bill and discussing prioritising local procurement, I mean, in some cases that'll be hyper-local to support communities. How do we balance this? How do we reconcile the interests of free trade and the interests of community wealth building, and has that been part of your consideration?
Well, it's part of our consideration. It's a legal requirement for us to put this into law as a consequence of the UK free trade agreement. But yeah, you're right in the sense of there's always a tension. There's a consideration around about how much you want to globalise the economy and how much you want to produce locally. I think everybody would accept that there absolutely is a need for global markets in certain services and products. That's why the Scottish whisky, for example, is able to export and support many jobs in Scotland, and likewise there'll be much that India can produce that it would benefit Scottish public procurement and the economy more generally to import. And I think it really comes down to what particular goods and services you're talking about. So there will be some areas where they're more suited to local supply, hyper-local services, as you said, or local products that can be most effectively and efficiently supplied locally. And absolutely, in the Community Wealth Building Bill, treated in the round, because procurement's only one part of that, and indeed across our wider public procurement, we've got a huge focus on what we can do to support and develop Scottish businesses. But I think it's absolutely undeniable that being able to trade internationally is also a huge benefit to Scotland's economy.
On that similar theme, one of the matters we've discussed in this committee is the outsourcing of our carbon footprint. So as we in Scotland more or less keep alignment with the EU on things like pesticides and other environmental regulations, by joining this free trade agreement with India, are we allowing the imports of goods that have been, say, food grown with harmful pesticides, products manufactured with harmful environmental impacts? Are we just outsourcing our carbon footprint and environmental damage here?
Well, so first of all, it's a UK government free trade agreement, so it's not something that we've unfortunately been in the room when the negotiations have taken place. I'm not familiar with all the chapters in the agreement, but I'll be pretty sure there'll be a climate chapter and environmental chapters in there. But if you want us to provide more information on what the UK government's negotiated there, we can do that. But as I say, it would be normal for there to be those chapters in an FTA to address precisely the points that you've raised.
I would really appreciate if the Minister could write to us and let us know what protections are there. And finally, are there any issues with this in this trade agreement that would be problems if the UK or an independent Scotland were to rejoin the EU?
Well, the EU has also just negotiated an FTA with India, and if you look at, for example, on tariffs on spirits, where the Scottish Whisky Association sees reductions in tariffs as a consequence of the UK FTA. The EU deal is broadly similar. It starts slightly later because it was negotiated later, but the ramp down in terms of reduction in tariffs is actually faster for EU exporters to India than for UK exporters, including Scotch whisky. So if Scotland or the UK were part of the EU, the FTA would be broadly similar. Clearly, when you're in the EU, you've got much larger negotiating power, so by and large you would expect them to be able to negotiate better deals than the UK would.
Thank you. Thank you, Convener.
Thank you. And Stephen Carr.
Yeah, can I pick up on the point that Lorna Slater introduced? Public sector contracts are notoriously margin tight for businesses that win them. What assessment have you been able to do about the impact of this new competitive element for those contracts on SMEs in Scotland?
I don't think we've got any specific on that yet. Yeah, because we won't know who will be, what bid you might expect for what products or services and what sectors. But we would be able to assess that once we see what Indian businesses would be seeking to bid into the Scottish market and what the consequences of that would be.
So at present there's been no assessment of what the impact of this deal would be on businesses competing for those contracts?
Well, as I say, it's a UK FTA. It's not a deal that we've negotiated. So we only find out what's in it at the end of the process. And in terms of the assessment on that, I'm not aware of anything, but I'll check back with officials. Right. But as I say, it would be difficult to be able to do that in the absence of what the specific bidding into the Scottish market on specific goods and services from Indian businesses would be. There will no doubt be assessments done at a UK-wide level, and we can certainly seek to access that.
I mean, the risk is, and I think Lorna Slater rightly identified as we've just spent some time talking about how we retain wealth in our communities. The risk, which I think you're acknowledging, is that there might be a propensity to spreadsheet these contracts basically and award them to the lowest cost bid. That might involve for example, a company from India who are to be treated on the same footing as a Scottish business or a UK business, having a much lower cost base to manage low margin priced contracts. I think you're acknowledging that.
Well, it'll depend very much on the sector and what the offer is.
Well, most public sector contracts, in my experience, are pretty tightly priced, and that might be seen as a good thing from a taxpayer's value point of view, but it's also quite difficult for businesses, particularly SMEs, to be able to compete, to even put a bid forward because of the scale of I suppose the commercial risk that they face if they price low. I mean, that's the story behind a lot of the highly publicised contract failures. I'm talking about the UK generally now. For example, Carillion, who were pricing for public sector work at a very low margin. So this is another pressure. I think that's what I'm asking you to concede, that this is another pressure on businesses to have to respond to low-cost bids.
Well, it depends very much on what the sector is and what the product is. And if you're talking about construction, if Indian businesses were bidding in for construction contracts in the Scottish public sector, clearly the delivery of those would involve a workforce that would be based in Scotland. If it's products that they're manufacturing on the global market, then typically they'll be competing with other global suppliers of those products. If it's local services, you would expect local businesses to be much better placed to be able to provide those. And of course, you need to take into account transport and logistics costs and times, and a whole range of other factors will affect that decision on where the procurement happens.
And the social value dimensions of this. So that's a point that we've raised, particularly in relation, for example, to the situation on electric buses, which is highly topical at the minute. But you talked about, we'll have to see, you mentioned that a few days, we'll have to see how this works out. So what are the provisions, what are the arrangements for assessing the impact of this particular trade agreement on, for example, as I've raised, Scottish SMEs? How will that be done, and how will we get included in that loop of feedback so that we can see what the impact is?
Well, I can certainly feedback on analysis we take forward on this. As I said, there'll have been analysis done by UK government as part of the negotiations. How much of that we've got access to, I'll check and provide what we have there. In terms of the impact on Scottish SMEs, I think all you'd be able to see is if there was any increase in the number of Indian businesses winning contracts, and then to understand who else would have won that contract otherwise, and that may well have been another global supplier, or a large UK or Scottish business, or it may have been an SME. So I think it'd be difficult to unpick that, but I'll certainly go and sit with officials and see what work we've got in train that's able to address that particular issue. But I think you've got to recognise the fact that if you look at procurement in general, as I indicated to the committee before, 47% of our 16.5 billion public sector spend in Scotland is with SMEs. So we've got a very, very strong record in placing contracts with SMEs, and with Scottish SMEs in particular.
The thing I'm raising is the fact that, and I speak as someone who believes in free trade, of course, but I also want to be sure that we're not disadvantaging our domestic businesses who are already under a lot of pressure, as we all know. And just can I ask about this? This will be a UK-wide measure, so there will be no risk of one part of the UK complying with this, or one part of the public sector complying with this in one part of the United Kingdom and other parts of the United Kingdom not complying. I think you know what I'm talking about. There will be an even implementation of this. Is that correct?
The UK and Wales are also implementing this because it's a requirement of the FTA.
Northern Ireland will all be in the same. Right.
Northern Ireland, I don't know, to be honest. So it's UK-wide, yeah, including Northern Ireland. There you go.
Including Northern Ireland. Right, okay. I thought it would include Northern Ireland. I guess that's it. Those are my concerns, which are broadly in line with those of the
Willie Coffey has indicated he'd like to ask a question.
Convener, Minister, I was just... Beg your pardon.
Do you have a sustainable procurement duty, of course, in law in Scotland, which requires any public contracts that are placed not to be placed just on the basis of price and to take into account all, and that's why we've driven such a large percentage of contracts going to SMEs in Scotland.
I understand what the technical aspect of it is. I'm always interested, as I'm sure you are, with the practical implementation of these policies.
Okay, thank you. Sorry.
Minister, are there any exclusions within the agreement? I'm thinking in terms of digital AI, call centre, that kind of business where we're already at a significant disadvantage, I think, with quite a lot of that business being driven and sourced in India that serves the UK customer base.
Do you have any details on that?
Not in relation to procurement. There's not. There
Right,
are no
okay.
exclusions. It's
No
just
exclusions.
Standard equal
Yeah.
treatment.
So, same question to other colleagues. Do you think there's a risk facing Scotland that we might lose offshore more of these digital services under that agreement than
Again, I mean, this analysis would have been done at a UK level, and I can come back with any specifics on that in terms of what that work is uncovered, and update the committee on that.
Right. Thank you.
Just further to that, I mean, it strikes me, I mean, well, members have been asking questions about kind of the balance of trade in goods. I mean, actually, India, in terms of its global competition, is probably more on the services side. They've got some very significant global businesses, particularly in IT services. So just with that, I mean, do you have information about the quantum that the Scottish Government has spent with Indian services providers such as TCS or Infosys or others?
Just pull that number up just now. I say the total imports from India were about 480 million into Scotland. That includes goods and services, and that's public and private sector. So we'll see if we can pull up the number on the public sector specifically, but I expect it obviously be a lot smaller than that. Okay. There's nothing here on public sector. Oh, there we go. So the last 3 years of which we've got data available, well, last year 0.9 million, the year before it 1 million, the year before that 500,000. So not significant numbers.
No. And do you anticipate any alterations in terms of actually the Scottish Government's procurement processes in terms of tenders and bidding processes, particularly for digital services as a result of this trade agreement?
We wouldn't change any of the processes because obviously those are configured to deal with Scottish, UK and international markets already. Whether you'll see more Indian bidders as a consequence of this, it's difficult to assess at the moment.
Thank you very much. Unless there are any other indications from members, I'll move to the next agenda item, which is the formal consideration of the motion. And I would invite the Minister to speak to and move the motion S6M 20367 that the Economy and Fair Work Committee recommends that the Public Procurement India Trade Agreement Miscellaneous Amendment Scotland Regulations 2026 draft be approved. Minister to move.
Moved.
And are there any indications from members that they would like to speak? Stephen Kerr.
I just want to say that it's important, given the numbers that the Minister shared with us moments ago, there clearly are huge opportunities for Scottish business in India. But similarly, it has to be said that there are now clear opportunities for Indian businesses in Scotland. That's the nature of trade. But I think we also need to be constantly assessing what the impact of any trade agreement is, simply because free trade exists only on the basis of the appropriately applied remedies. If there's any form of fairness in a trade agreement, then it can quickly become less than the asset that we think we currently have, and therefore it's a constant case of vigilance. And I know what the Minister has said about this is a UK trade agreement. It is a reserved matter. Trade is reserved. But I also do think that there is a part to be played in Scotland by our public authorities and our government to make sure that this trade agreement is properly balanced and fair, and I hope that the Minister would take that on board. He's mentioned a few times that there was provision on the part of Scottish ministers working with UK ministers to assess the impact of the trade agreement. I think I've understood that correctly.
The UK will have done assessments, but that Scottish Government wouldn't have been involved in any of that discussion.
And I understand that, but of course economic policy, there is shared responsibilities in many areas, so all I'm saying is I hope that it will be something that will be monitored and assessed as we go along, and not just parked and then one day someone wakes up and realises that this has not had the impact that we had hoped it would have, because that's the nature of free trade if it's to be maintained.
Are there any other members wishing to make contributions? Don't see any indications. Minister, would you like to...
Just in reference to the points that Stephen Kerr's made, in terms of the overall trade relationship, we track very closely on an annual basis by country the exports and imports from Scotland to and from other countries, including India. And India is obviously one of the target markets in the export strategy in terms of seeking to increase exports, and the FTA will support, obviously, Scottish whisky sector and others in that endeavour, but that data is tracked by SDI and by government on an annual basis. And in terms of the public sector procurement, clearly we publish extensive data on the spend of public bodies on an annual basis, identifying how much of that is spent in Scotland, the rest of the UK or internationally, and have quoted data on the proportion of that is from suppliers in India, and we'll continue to track that data.
Thank you very much. The question, therefore, is that motion S6M 20367 be approved. Are we all agreed? We are agreed, and the committee will prepare a short report which will be published, and I invite the committee to delegate the report to be approved by myself. Thank you very much. And with that, we move into private session, and can I thank the Minister for his contribution this morning. Thank you.